Minister for Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science, James Lawless. You're welcome to the podcast. Now, we're going to talk about the stuff that you are doing at the moment. There's a lot of AI, research, innovation. We're going to talk about supercomputers. Before we get to that, just let me ask you about the ban on under 16s. Are you in favour?
So I've changed my mind on this in the last decade. Originally, I would have been against it because I thought that technology should be available to everybody. And I think that kids and everybody will find a way around bans anyway. However, I'm probably more negative on social media than I would have been previously. It's not just actually for children, although obviously they have to be protected more because they are, I suppose, are more vulnerable. But I think that I'm unconvinced whether social media has been a net benefit or net cost to society and civilization. Our attention spans through the floor. Content, harmful content, we see Grok is the latest and amongst many atrocities, in harmful content space. We see, when I say fake news, what I really mean by that is concentric circles of reinforcing content. So people not seeing both sides of a debate, not having the traditional yin and yang and, different sides of a panel discussion, but actually being driven more and more into a black hole of reinforcing logic and being sucked into, whether that's a YouTube spiral or it can happen in broadcast TV as well, but typically more so on the internet. So I suppose from my mind, the promise of social media was that it was a leveler, that the digital.
I mean, that is still our promise, and it's still. Yeah. Like I wrote a column a few weeks ago explaining why I was going to stay on X in particular. That I wasn't ready yet to see to elements that were completely devoted to disinformation. I know that you post on X as well, but the mood seems to have shifted noticeably in, I would say, even recent months and particularly recent weeks. I'm wondering, did the combination of the ex-Grok thing and maybe a slightly more robust relationship between Europe and the US as well, where there maybe isn't quite as much goodwill between the two. I wonder if that's...
So I think they are factors, geopolitical events, but I also think that we've almost gone full circle. So I'll give an example of my own operations. So I started a Substack recently. I've only got a couple of posts on it. And I like long form media. I hope I've got a lot to say, and sometimes it takes me a while to develop an argument. So I prefer that sort of opportunity, and like today podcast, than a sort of wham bam headline short piece. So I started writing on Substack, and it reminded me, and a pal of mine said, but you have the blog. I used to write blogs back in like 2009, 2008, and it's almost feels like we've gone full circle. And looking at X for a minute, I suppose one of the arguments I made in favour of X, and obviously I don't endorse the behaviour, and the owner of the platform has weaponized it, I think, and has actually been, the algorithm is perpetuating a particular type of content, and we're seeing people amplified way beyond their real world reach. And we see that in examples of Irish. I won't even name the individuals for fear of going further platforms, where Musk is actually retweeting Irish tweeters who we would know in an Irish context have a microscopic audience and no electoral platform, but yet he's actually putting them in front of billions. So there's a lot of negatives, but the one plus I will give to it is that it's an unfiltered, untethered, direct channel. So if I want to say something, and there's times as minister between different roles I've held over the last couple of years and other political roles where I just wanted to get straight out and make a statement and not have, 3 different pens on it and marking it up and getting through multiple layers. I just wanted to say something to the world. And that is one of the benefits of X. You can just go and post and it's live. And I suppose that is, unlike, say, even the likes of the Meta platforms where you have to have an account, or TikTok, if you're not a subscriber, you can't. It's harder, you can probably get to it. X is unfiltered for right and for wrong, but there is a benefit of having a place where you can post something immediately. And Trump, for all his faults, recognised that early on. He spoke actually in his 2016 election. I reserve comment to the American president. Diplomatic protocol suggests that we hold our counsel. But what he said of the 2016 election was he effectively ignored the mainstream media because he felt they didn't give him a fair hearing. And that's why he embraced at the time Twitter, now X, and platforms like that, because there's a way that he could cut through. So, I suppose that's the point he was making. I come from a different political school, but I sort of make a similar point that is one of the few benefits. You can actually have an immediate cut through. You can go straight to source. Anybody can click into it and see it, and you can put out a statement that has immediate effect. So there's benefits of that, and I think your point as well about not ceding it to I suppose not allowing the lunatics to run the asylum, I think is a good point as well.
Yeah. So, but just again in the context of the under 16s, because obviously Taoiseach has been out, obviously has taken a strong view on this. And a few years ago, I think if this view were articulated, it would have been listened to. But now it seems that there's been a shift in mood. Two other thoughts about that. The first is whether that lets the social media companies off the hook in a sense, because it's an alternative to forcing them to what this thing called safety by design, where the networks and the algorithms should be safe, rather than just saying, well, we'll sort of put sticking plaster by banning, young teens on it. And the second element is, I wonder, are we afraid to tell parents to stop letting their kids using social media? Like, I don't hear the messaging around that. I hear the dangers about social media platforms. I hear, like liability should accrue, all of those things. I don't hear messaging around parents and kids.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think parental responsibility is a big part of this. You wouldn't let a child play with a knife, but you let a child play with a phone. And there's equally, if not far more dangerous content on it.
But why do we do that, though? Is I'm one positing out loud.
Yeah.
Why is it that we're focused so much on banning it, and we're not really focused either on safety by design? We are to an extent through the Digital Service Act, but not overtly. And we're certainly not. We don't have messaging around parents. Like, for example, if I were to ask you whether 15-year-olds should be allowed to use or watch YouTube, I mean, I think that, I'm sure you would pause. Like, do you think 15-year-olds should be allowed to watch YouTube?
I think it depends on the content. So I think a 15-year-old doing a homework assignment should be able to watch an educational video, for sure. Should they be able to go down a rabbit hole and watch whatever they fancy? No. And there are parental controls.
But this would ban
apps.
YouTube for under 16s, like the Australians have done. So how do we think about that?
So one thing you could do is use safety by design and parental control, and sort of being able to turn on and off different settings. So, all the search engines now have different filters.
They have that. We're talking about banning it.
Yeah, well, some people are. There's a debate going on around that. I don't think government has taken a position as yet on that. Say, I'm coming round to that view. I would have always been a sort of free speech advocate. I would have someone who believed that technology is universal and will be embraced, and it's sort of a false premise to try to ban things because people get around them. And so that's my starting point. But I'm becoming more sympathetic to the argument of the censors that say maybe we should have banned this stuff altogether for all the negative reasons. Actually, primarily attention span deficit. In my new role in training and education, I hear multiple employers and educators saying we can't get kids to concentrate because if it's not 30 seconds, if it's not 2 seconds to grab the attention, it's gone. I think that's a loss to the system. But I suppose some things we have tried to do as government, like the phone pouches, caused a lot of controversy. But if you look at what's happening there, taking phones away from kids when they go into the schoolroom. And I was in a school last year and I was talking to a principal and he said something to me that really resonated. He said, schools are noisy again. Because kids are talking to each other. They're kicking a ball, they're chatting in the
Is there not rooms. Also a peer pressure element? I remember when Greystones introduced that, I think they were the first out really with primary school, a ban or fatwa on phones. And it became almost a kind of a middle class peer parent thing to my sensibility, where if your kid brought a phone to school, it was almost like a behavioural or a manners faux pas. And that seems to have worked in that context. Whereas, I mean, we did research, CyberSafe Kids did research, and we covered it about more challenging neighbourhoods, Daesh neighbourhoods, for example. Phone ownership is much higher among kids there. But that seems to have been the only thing that really works.
Yeah. So that's kind of the wisdom of crowds and that kind of peer pressure, and it's frowned upon societally. But
bit of snobbery as well.
Bit of snobbery maybe as well, yeah. So, I mean, that's one way to tackle it. I think parental awareness and would you let a child use other effectively what can be dangerous objects, certainly if it used incorrectly. But it permeates so many other things. So one of the things I've been talking about recently in my brief is student accommodation. And some of the feedback, anecdotally and in terms of various reports, was that when they built single room mini apartments right across student dorms, students would go to class. Actually, not always, because they might log in, might be a virtual class, but in the scenario where they're going to a physical classroom, come back, pull the door behind them, and not leave and not socialise and not mix. And certainly in my college days, it's a while ago now, but I think most of us have memories of socialising, networking, meeting people you liked, meeting people you didn't like, finding your tribe eventually through all that. And that's almost being lost. And it's one of the reasons I'm trying to promote more shared spaces in the new student builds, be that shared lounge areas, be that kitchens.
You know
all that
why
stuff.
80% of nightclubs in Dublin have declined over the last 20 years.
It's Tinder, isn't it?
Of course
And
it is.
dating apps. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
Tinder.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
dating apps. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I take your point on that. Let me talk to you about some of the stuff in your own brief. Some of that is around AI. I'll come on to stuff like the Inspire program in a moment. But where are we at in Ireland at the moment with AI? Would you say?
So look, we're doing okay, but we need to do a lot better. Okay, so it depends what study you look at. We've had a number of reports, and some of the reports suggest that Ireland's doing really well. I think we have, probably because of our home to so many tech firms and such a strong tech industry, we have a solid base of super users and advanced understanding. Where we're not doing so well is the kind of middle ground and the entry level. So we need to promote digital literacy. That goes to everything from what we call the silver surfer, the maybe retired person who is trying to get a handle on what they can do.
Can you say exactly what you mean by that? So digital literacy in relation to what? To using ChatGPT? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, all the above. Yeah. So digital literacy in terms of, I suppose, AI literacy. So foundational level AI skills. So one example that use case we talk about is, say, the builder who is a traditional on-site guy who isn't really computer savvy, but actually realizes he can run a voice note into a system which will narrative that from type it up.
And is that the kind of stuff that just emerges from his competitor realizing that and getting a head start and getting more done or winning a contract?
Yeah, so I always think competition is a good thing, and I think competition will rise all boats. I'm a very strong believer in that. But going back to sovereignty, nationally we want to be competitive. I want Ireland to be competitive, so I want to help all the different industries to embrace AI more comprehensively, faster, so that we don't have to, because ultimately, there'll be competition between players on the pitch, but ultimately we have a bigger picture goal here, which is Ireland remaining a really strong destination for global talent, for global investment, for FDI, for all these things. So what do we need to do? Okay, so one of the things I'm looking to do is I'm launching an AI skilling platform that is a online one-stop shop where you can go to get your AI content, everything from your introductory package for your silver surfer or your builder that wants to get tech savvy, right through to medium level use cases, right through to your advanced user. So a lot of this is already available on different platforms, public and private, but pulling it together into one place. I've asked the team to get that done by the end of this quarter, so it's ambitious enough timetable.
Does that mean that we're pro AI? Because sometimes the messaging again is a little mixed. There's data centers is a complicated and a controversial topic here, but that's often lumped in with AI. So are we pro AI, which kind of means we have to be pro data center as well?
I am pro data centers. I'm pro data and I'm pro technology. Always have been. I think so. I studied maths, then I studied high performance computing for my master's degree, and I worked in the industry for about 10 years. So I come from a tech background professionally. I worked in law, trained as a barrister later on, and so moved around a few times as people do these days. People change career, and something I advocate for in my role and want to enable that sort of those different paths. There's no wrong or right path through life. But one of the new things in the programme for government that we have strongly embraced and are looking to really roll out, and things like the infrastructure guidelines, we need to be a centre for tech excellence. That means we need to be centre for AI. That means we need to be centre, and that means we need to have data centres. So how do we do that? So how do we do that in a way that is responsibly using the grid and the available resources? So there's a couple of different things. We look at alternative approaches. So things like private wire, for example. So private wire is a technology where, at the moment, and your listeners might be surprised to hear this, some of the larger firms, and including actually public sector bodies, but typically the hyperscalers, the big firms, they want to provide their own energy. They want to have a wind farm out the back or a solar farm at the front or both, hooked up to their own data center or their own technology park. Right now, under legislation, they can't do that. And actually, if they do, as some of them are already doing, if they do generate power on site, it has to go out through a wire, back into the grid, and then they draw back down some other way. Okay, so that's because historically, when ESB was set up with Arna Crush and all those great things, the foundation of the state, it was the only provider of electricity for lots of really good reasons.
So we didn't want to foster private fiefdoms creating.
So one thing is it's in the programme for government and we're doing it. So by enabling private wire, what it means is that your technology park now can set up in its own resources. It can put that wind farm adjacent with the tech center and data centers. It can generate power on site, and it can plug it directly into its own consumption. So you have production and consumption on the one site, not affecting the grid at all. And when we've done that, and we've got a couple of, the primary usage is exactly that. Also, you could supply a neighbour, for example. Now, we don't want to see, and it's not provided for the legislation, alternative electricity providers. It's not there's going to be a million ESBs, there's not. But if you have a site and you have the wherewithal and the capacity, and you'll have to pass various regulatory tests,
so they might
you can do that.
Depend on the grid as much.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of people in your chair, founders, some very successful ones, who are very worried about regulation in Europe, in the EU, and in Ireland. I've had one founder who got 20 million in funding, but who felt he had to move his startup to Singapore because he didn't have clarity, in his view, about the regulatory and legal landscape for his AI led startup. If we're pro AI, how do we feel now about the regulatory situation here? I mean, post Draghi, it seems like there are second thoughts about some of the regulatory standards.
Yeah, so one of the big dynamics at European level, and Draghi obviously was key to it in the letter report that came after, and one of the things that we need to do to be a superpower economically, and I think, I'm very much on Team Europe. I'm an active participant in all the EU councils on my brief and otherwise. And I think that recent events have taught us that Europe has to have the capacity to stand on our own 2 feet. We can't look a big brother across the Atlantic, maybe in the way that we used to. We'll always be friends and allies.
For example, I was talking to Des Traynor recently of Intercom. I interviewed him, and the point he made was, look, we're using all these models anyway. I mean, you've got OpenAI, you've got Claude, you have Gemini. For those who care for it, you also have Grok or XAI. They are the models we are using predominantly in Europe anyway. So our regulation hasn't actually helped us foster alternatives. Mistral is a relatively small French one. And they have a point, don't they?
Yeah, no, they do. And I'd also throw in the example of DeepSeek. So when China released that on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve, whatever it was, about a year ago, and allegedly it was done with a fraction of the resources, that makes it possible.
You could fit the entire model at the time on one Mac Ultra.
Okay.
So that you could isolate, firewall the entire thing off from the web, and still put in all of your queries.
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary. But that does challenge us to say if another jurisdiction can actually produce a similar potentially product set much cheaper, faster, what are we doing wrong? So there is a trend across Europe towards, I wouldn't say deregulation, but towards faster, more agile, more responsive regulation. So things like the AI Act, we have in my own area the Innovation Act, the European Research Act, coming through. Many of those will come to a head during our presidency, the second half of this year. And I think what we need to do is, it shouldn't be a free-for-all. There should be some degree of high-level regulation, but it should be agile and responsive. And the other thing, I was talking about Grok a few weeks ago, and I think it carries to many, many areas. Regulation should always be pitched at a sufficiently high level that it can future-proof emerging trends. Because if you try to be very specific in legislation or regulation, or even code, if you write up, I'd say, well, in this scenario, this very specific, you're going to be overtaken by events.
So that's Apple's problem. So the last time I was over there in Cupertino, they held a round table. This was last September, and their global, I think he was a marketing chief, but he spoke for all of Apple. He was going through the list of things they felt they couldn't launch in Europe, and he went through the legislation here, the European stuff, Digital Markets Act in particular, and specific bits of it as to why they couldn't actually translate one piece of technology into another because there was uncertainty over whether they'd have to give it to Samsung and all that kind of stuff. To your point, exactly. So you take his criticism, you take the criticism of the founders here in Ireland to say that they don't feel that they might be allowed to do some of the things they would be allowed to do in other jurisdictions. And it does strike me we might have a bit of a problem. Yeah,
so look, I suppose I'd be the first to acknowledge that not everything is not perfect. And one of the things I've tried to do as a minister in this role, and will do more over the coming years, to listen and engage with industry. So I went out to meet a number of multinationals and indigenous firms in my first few months as minister. Really interesting feedback from them all. Not necessarily what I wanted to hear, but what I needed to hear. in terms
And then
of the
how does that
skills
work?
gaps.
When you bring that back, what happens then?
So I action it in terms of new policy and new measures. And I suppose the programme for government is the starting point for any department. But we supplement that as we go along, and each minister brings their own ideas and mindset to the job. So I'm setting up.
How do they, and don't take this the wrong way, but how do they, when you bring these topics up, do they go, oh my God, there's Lawless again. He's the tech guy. He's the geek. He's the nerd. Here he is going on about this. How do they respond to
but I
that?
suppose a little different now that I'm a cabinet minister. I was bringing these things up as a backbencher 6-7 years ago, and I probably got that reaction from including some of the cabinet ministers at the time who weren't. I was at the side of the house then as opposition, but I suppose. It's one of the privileges of sitting in the chair that I sit in now, that I have a brief and I have a responsibility to engage and to bring forward new policies.
These are not populist issues. These
No,
might
they're
be
niche.
difficult.
They're often and they can be niche, and I suppose it is sometimes a challenge to get cut through because some of these things don't necessarily make the front pages. That they're issues who are extremely important, I think, to our economic model and competitiveness and our future success rate for our population of graduates as well as for our economic activity. But yeah, they don't necessarily get the same bandwidth as our traditional challenges of housing and health and so forth. And that can be a challenge. And it's also a challenge when you go to seek resources. So I had a negotiation last year for the National Development Plan. Now, I did well in the end. I got $4.5 billion from my department. And I did that by, I suppose, a very evidence-based approach. And I know we're going to talk about the Inspire Research Programme, but I set out very clearly. I think there was surprise in some quarters that my ask was as great as it was. And I was saying, are you not just the colleges and students? Yes, but all this other activity as well, which was absolutely worthy of it and fundamental to what I do and what the department does, but maybe wasn't as clearly understood hitherto.
Of that $4.5 billion, I think 750 million went to the Inspire Research Infrastructure Program. So that included, for example, high performance computing upgrade. Really interesting. When you say the word supercomputer, people start thinking, oh, that's kind of interesting, until you actually look at the detail. Now, Ireland does have a national supercomputer, K, and I think Casper is on the way out in Galway. But I mean, to put it in perspective, like the Americans, I think the world's top one is El Capitan, and that has... it's an exaflop scale. So an exaflop, for any listeners who aren't fully up on their metrics, it's a billion calculations per second, a quintillion calculations per second. So if everyone on Earth did one calculation per second, you'd still need over 3 years for that to match that. Okay, that's the scale at which the top supercomputers are working. I mean, we're nowhere near that.
Yeah. So it is extraordinary when you put it in terms like that, as you've just done. I think that kind of speaks to the power of these machines. So I visited Japan on a trade mission last summer, and I went to see Riken, which depends how you measure it, is one of the world's largest supercomputers. And that's
Europe has one as well. I mean,
yeah, it does. Yeah. So, but in Japan, it was interesting. They had a sort of little, I suppose, a bit of friendly rivalry. They have the States, they have the EU, they have Japan, and it depends whether there's teraflops or what. It depends how you actually calculate.
Yeah.
And there's certain metrics, and of course, they'll always choose the one that suits them, that puts them first. So we're not going to have a Riken, or the American equivalent, in terms of those kind of firepower, purely for resources. We couldn't afford one, being blunt, but we don't necessarily need one either, because we are part of Team Europe. So we're part of the European Supercomputing Initiative. So I signed us up to that actually last year. We weren't previously, but I signed us up to the Quantum Pact, signed us up to CERN, signed us up to the Supercomputing Initiative, and a number of other European families of research projects and innovation. So that means under that we can draw down, well, we purchase it, but we have access to a supercomputer. It'll be run out of University of Galway. The iCheck, the Irish Centre for High Performance Computing, operates out of there. The one we had actually is expired. K gave up its ghost, breathed its last about 2 years ago, and it's been replaced by Casper, which is the new one on the way in. And that's a pretty serious machine, but it won't be at the level of the world giants. But what it will do is collaborate with supercomputers in France. We have a French and Luxembourg AI antenna, it's called, which allows us to plug into those. And we're part of clusters around Europe. So collectively Europe, when you pool, like the Mistral you mentioned, the French one, etc., we'll have Casper in Ireland. When you pool their collective firepower, then we're at the races.
A few years ago, I had the head of what was called the of Trinity East. They had an innovation project. I had him in this chair, in this podcast. I interviewed the provost of Trinity around the same time as well. They had this massive plan.
Yeah.
It was a €1 billion plan. It was a 5.5 acre tech-friendly innovation camp city centre. There was an Indicon report in 2019 that suggested that it would create up to €3 billion. And the idea was to create this kind of hub like in Paris or London or even in Silicon Valley, where you'd have companies, research, innovation and universities. It was a really ambitious program, and to my mind it was by far the most exciting thing that I had heard of at the time. And then it just sort of got deflated. There was, I think, 150 million euro that I think had been maybe on the cards from the government. I don't think that materialised. I don't know, but it seems like the college may have lost its all of its enthusiasm from it. There are still elements there, but I mean, there were donations made on the back of that. The Jones Engineering Group chairman made a donation. All of the things that you've just talked about, to me, were encapsulated in that plan. What's your understanding of what happened there?
So I suppose that was before my time in government or as a minister, but I am familiar with the plan, and I would have met people like the provost at the time and very much supported it, albeit from opposition at the time. I'm not sure what specifically went wrong at that time. We weren't in government then, as I say. But what I would say is that that's exactly the kind of project that I want to see happen now. One of the people involved in that, Jim O'Brien, is now the chief executive.
He was
of
the person
Research
I
Ireland.
interviewed in
Super guy.
that chair. Yeah,
I hired him into Research Ireland last summer. Really strong guy, exactly the kind of person that we want. He has a really strong competitive economic understanding in terms of the impact of all this research. Irish guy who went to Cambridge, went abroad, did extremely well, and is now back home driving on innovation and research again. So really pleased we were able to get someone.
My read of that was it was a drop off in ambition, that we just lost our cojones for.
Yeah, that could be the case, and so that's one of the reasons. But I suppose if that was to happen now, with the work that I've been doing, first of all, I think it wouldn't fall off the table, I'd like to think. And secondly, the machinery and the funding to support that kind of thing is there. So I'll give an example. Tyndall. Tyndall is the National Semiconductor Facility down in Cork. I supported that to the tune of over 100 million. Just last month, right? So I'm actively doing that. That's a comparable project happening in Cork. Again, global edge. Like I was talking to the guys down there, they get calls from Caltech and MIT to see can they replicate particular models, because things that they can't do in those US top industries.
But you see,
can do
that was the shame of what appears to have happened in Trinity, because Trinity, and there are lots of great universities in Ireland.
Yeah.
Trinity is the only one that's consistently in the top 100. It probably has the strongest brand reference. As you know, brands like that in third level sector are critical for big tech and big science companies to come in. And here was a move to move Ireland to the next stage. We wouldn't be just the call centre guys and the admin guys and the finance guys, that we'd actually be in on the design. And we couldn't do it. So
as a Trinity graduate myself, I had to agree with your branding at Trinity. I love all my institutions equally, but I suppose that's where I studied. But I'd like to think that that I have addressed that gap in the system. I said 7 years ago, so I can only speak to it historically. I wasn't anything to do with it in terms. I wasn't anywhere near power at the time. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to see that up and running. But what I've set out to do is create a framework with significant funding. So the 750 million is for Inspire, but I actually have a wider 2.45 billion envelope for research and innovation generally, including Research Ireland, including everything from increasing the number of PhDs in the system, and we have a number of programs around that, from early career.
If they came to you then with a proposal around this, it's something you'd consider again, would it?
So what I would say to them, and the way I've done it, and that's why I've proactively set up these funds and these initiatives, I would say put your proposal together, put it into the competitive call that I'm opening this year and will be doing every year that I'm in this ministry. I've got significant funding behind it. Pitch it in. If the independent panel and the economic assessment is that it's positive, and I suspect strongly this would be in this case, it'll succeed and there's funding available for it.
Is there not a role, and I'm not being pejorative, for leadership here though as well? You might have a viewpoint on this that maybe the panel may not. They might have a slightly nuanced view. Isn't that the reason that you're the minister?
Yeah. So I suppose you can go too far in that way as well. And I think in the past we've seen maybe ministers cherry pick projects, pet projects, maybe at the expense of other equally compelling projects, and maybe even more compelling. So I think generally it's good practice for these kind of competitive calls to be managed by independent assessors. To my knowledge,
well, that way you never have to take the blame as well.
So if any college was to come to me with a proposal, I'm not aware there's a live proposal right now. So I suppose I don't want to go down the cul-de-sac and talk about a 7-year-old proposal that for whatever reason died off before I was either a minister or before my party was in government. I can guess or speculate, but I suppose what I'd like to look at is what I've done in the last 12 months and what I'm going to do in the next 5 years if I get that opportunity to continue to serve. What have I done? I've put 2.45 billion into research and innovation. I certainly have created the envelope for that. I've created for the first time in 15 years a 750 million fund for research infrastructure. I have a global talent call where I'm attracting. I have a call out for star researchers and be that young early career rising stars right through to established leaders in research to come to Ireland and be part of our ecosystem. But I mean, let's talk about Intel for a minute. Intel, I've been there multiple times. They do really high end both research, both innovation, both product development, advanced manufacturing. Some of their nanochips, some of their world class. Where leading chips are actually manufactured and designed. I mean, they did the foundry in Leixlip.
Yeah,
so the
that's
foundry
what's
was
going
not
to
just
save them now because they've been on a disastrous one. But actually, they've.
So I wouldn't want to talk down the activity that's happening in Ireland either. And a lot of our FDI is really substantial, knowledge-driven, ideas-driven activity. I think it strongly is. I think particularly in manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, semiconductors, thinking life sciences, thinking biopharma. There's a number of areas, and I'm going to grow that. So we have the knowledge economy and then the skills economy. So we talked earlier about the AI area. So I have a thing called the National Skills Observatory, which is a real-time data set that will allow policymakers like me and like my agencies and other members of government to have a look at different verticals. So whether it's construction, how many workers do we need for our housing challenge, whether it's the digital skills in terms of AI abilities and digital revolution, whether it's across energy, because we need to build out the grid and embrace renewables, whether it's healthcare, because we have a whole of government disability priority. So across all the different verticals, we can predict, we can look at what we have, we can look at the skill profile in the system, and we can look at gaps, and we can say, okay, I've identified a gap. We need X number of workers in this area. Go back to the colleges, go back to the training houses and say, that's something we need to tweak. We need to ramp that up. So it informs policy making, what we can do and what we can't do, and how we address the gaps that we have. So we have the Skills Observatory. I mentioned the AI Skilling Initiative, which I aim to train up to 1 million people across a number of AI courses. That's kicking off later this quarter. So I'm going ahead with all this stuff. So I'm in the job, I think, 12 months now.
Okay, look, and, last question.
Getting busy fast.
You mentioned C++ earlier on because you studied maths and physics in Trinity. You started coding using C++.
Yes.
Have you tried any AI vibe coding?
I haven't tried vibe coding. I've used all the apps. I've used ChatGPT.
Well, what's your
Gemini.
preference? Do you Claude, Gemini?
I like ChatGPT, actually. I think it's easy, it's intuitive. I'm only on the free version, so it kicks me out after a couple of queries. Yeah. It's interesting. You do need to check it because it gets things wrong. Okay, so particularly a more nuanced policy query, if you ask it to put together a policy paper on something, you have to so I've just experimented. I've given it the pro and the con. Give me the argument for, give me the argument against. It's quite interesting to do that. It's not bad. I would say it's at a level what I describe as junior cert English. It's reasonably okay, maybe a little bit overly loquacious at times. Certain phrases, which to be honest bug me, at its core, comma. That's in every single AI produced speech ever. You can see an AI produced policy paper. Yeah, the dash gives it away as well. There are certain messages. And sometimes it says a lot without saying anything, and it's not the only entity guilty of that. But I think that it's look. I think the Google one is pretty interesting
Gemini.
as well. Yeah, Gemini. I tried that out. I was out in their offices recently. I tried it out, and having been at Microsoft this morning, I better mention their products there as well. Yeah, that is actually helpful because it's embedded. Because you're writing a Word doc, it suddenly pops up and starts giving you.
I think they took a bit of a hit to their brand there the other week with the police, the West Midlands Police. Was it the West Midlands Police when the inspector? The chief used it to inform it on policing strategy for a football game, and it invented a game with Maccabi Haifa that hadn't actually taken place. I think he had to resign because of that.
Okay.
So
I didn't see that one, but what I have seen is the legal citations that didn't exist, and a judge pulled them apart. I think there's a couple of high-profile cases like that. But I suppose my attitude. I
often wonder how much it's used in the Dáil. Or in speeches and prepared.
And I have to go shout out. The Mayor of Cork said in an interview last week that he uses it for speeches, and I thought it was very honest. And I think the way he actually described it was spot on. He said, "I use it to generate." He said he feeds in his thoughts. It structures them in a way that he's happy with, but he always personalizes and goes back over it. I think what we can't do with any technology, whether it's AI, it's just the latest in long line technologies. We use it to take out the grunt work, and we use it to add value and fast track and automate certain processes. But we always should have the human layer to make sure, is it actually on message? Is it what I want to say? Is it actually capturing the emotion of what I want to do? Is it capturing the essence, and is it actually correct? Because some of the ones that I've experimented with were not correct. They made fundamental errors of both the fact and logic. So I don't think it's quite there yet. But technology comes at us every day. This is the latest one. Moore's Law talked about doubling every 18 months. We're pretty much, I think, still on track. If we look at quantum, we always think that this is the end. It's never the end. So it was Darwin said that the societies that survive and thrive are not the biggest, not the fastest, not the strongest. They're the ones most adaptable to change. And I think that's a lesson that I certainly take on board every day, and I think that we could all benefit from.
Okay, Minister for Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science, James Lawless, thank you so much for joining us on The Big Tech Show. Gav Hennessy was on sound and JJ Clark produced this episode. My name is Adrian Weckler, and you've been listening to or watching The Big Tech Show, and we'll talk to you soon.